My name is Edna Lindley, and I was born in the suburb of Kedron in Brisbane, Australia, number 5 of 7 children. I was born in 1927, and I attended Lilwan School until I was the age of 14, when I left and went to work for a company called Medical and Surgical Requisites, which supplied medicines to the hospitals. And when I was 16, my friend and I volunteered with the American Red Cross, and one of the things was to go to dances, and we could dance with the boys, but we couldn't date them. So one evening there was what they called the ship's dance, and my husband was stationed in Brisbane. He was in the Navy, but he was with a repair unit. And so he was at the dance, and of course I loved to dance, and of all things he didn't even dance. But he was sitting across the table from me, and my friend introduced me to him. And so we talked, and so when the dance was over, he asked to take me home, and I said, "I'm sorry, but you can't do that." And he said, "Well, we can work around that." And so he went outside and waited on me. And so he had wanted to date the next night, and so I said, "Okay." So when he came out to the house, my family just fell in love with him, and so we started dating, and we'd been dating about 2 months when he asked me to marry him. And of course I was just 16, and I said, "Oh, you'll just have to go ask my father," because I couldn't say yes, being at 16. So the next night he comes, and he has 2 of the biggest bottles of wine I have ever seen. And where he got them from, I have no idea. And my brother-in-law was in the Australian Army, was home on leave, and he was there. So my husband, Jim, decided that he was going to get them both drunk, which he did. And then he asked for my hand. And my father said, "Well, I'll give her permission that she can marry you, but she has to wait until she's 17. So we just went ahead with the plans for the wedding, and that was I think in May. And so I was going to be 17 in October. So we went ahead with the plans for the wedding. And of course, with the coupons and everything, there was no way I could buy a wedding dress. So I got to looking in the newspaper every evening. And so finally, I found this dress and the veil that fitted me perfectly. So my husband told my father, he said, "Well, I'll have to have a letter stating that you're giving me permission." So my father, because he was drunk, and I can still remember, I still have the letter. "I, John William Hannell, do hereby give the permission for my daughter Edna Hannell to marry Elmer Arthur Lindley of the U.S. Navy, signed John William Hannell, Esquire." And my brother-in-law was the Justice of the Peace, and he signed his name, Gordon Smith, Justice of the Peace. And I've often wondered what Jim's commander thought about that letter. But I got it back, so I guess it was all right. So I turned 17 one Saturday and was married the next. And my husband and I could not find a flat anywhere. So we finally found a room with kitchen privileges. And so we stayed there until January of 45. We were married in 44, and this was January of 45. And he was shipped to the Philippines. And because they'd been there in Brisbane for over a year, a lot of the boys had married Brisbane girls. And so they were left Brisbane in January, and in July, they were told that they were going to get a month's leave in America, and the boys that were married to Australian girls all went and asked if they could go to Australia instead of going to America. And they hadn't told Jim that they were doing that, and he was standing in chow line, and they told him, and he said, "Well, when I get through eating, I'll go do it." And it turned out, since he applied by himself, he was the only one that got leave to Australia. All the others were shipped back to America. So he had the whole month of August with me, and by that time I had a baby. And so he spent the month, and then after the month was over, he reported to the naval base there in Brisbane, and they told him that he'd have to stay there until there was transportation back to the Philippines. And so every morning he'd leave just like he had a job, and every evening he'd meet my dad. They'd have a glass of beer, and they'd come home. And this went on for about 2 weeks, and then finally we told each other goodbye every morning, and then here he'd come of an afternoon, but then finally after 2 weeks he didn't come. So he was in the Philippines until, let's see, that was August. He was in the Philippines till December, and then he was shipped home, and the war was over, and I started getting my papers in order and everything, and my daughter and I were left Brisbane on May the 31st on the Mariposa, and arrived in America, in San Francisco on June the 14th, and arrived in Indiana, which was where I live now, in June of 17th of 1946. And the first day that I arrived, I was accepted, but that didn't last long, and it would take too long to tell what I went through with my in-laws. And so finally, and I had to live with them for 3 years. And finally, my husband bought a little 4-room house. It had no plumbing. It had a pump out the back door where we got the water. It had an outside toilet. And but I was in heaven because I had my own place. And I always remember the first time that I went out to the toilet on the outside in the wintertime, and there was frost all over the seat, and I thought, oh my God, you know. So I finally got used to that, and then later on I had another daughter, and who I lost in 1996 with a brain tumor. But he finally bought another 2-story house which had plumbing. And then, in fact, the little 4-room house, we moved there in the fall, and we didn't even have a refrigerator. He built a little shelf out on the back porch, and that's where I kept the milk and stuff during the winter months, till we could afford a refrigerator in the spring. And let's see, we bought this little this 2-story house, and we stayed there for a few years, and then finally he built me a brick home. And that's where we lived until he died. And he died 2 days after 9/11 in 2001. And so I've been there by myself ever since. And I did receive my Australian citizenship back, so I have dual citizenship now. And if God willing, I'm going to go home again in March. So I've been happy here, and after I got out of that house, I've been happy. So, but I guess that's my story.